New South Wales Police Commissioner Karen Webb tries to justify her callous comments where she said the families of Jessie Baird and Luke Davies should be grateful to the alleged killer. Crime reporter Mark Murray will join me also to talk about the telly scoop that after allegedly murdering this beautiful couple, the police officer then went and made a bullying complaint. Bizarre behaviour. Also tonight, why female-focused brands are failing to pay their men and women employees equally. This is just blatant hypocrisy. Plus, the woke brigade has now infiltrated the Defence Force yet again with army dogs trained to be culturally sensitive. Have you ever heard of anything more ludicrous? But first tonight, to the news today that a Melbourne woman and a prominent advocate for victims in the Middle East has been accused of orchestrating the kidnapping and torture of a man because he works for a Jewish employer. I've tonight got new first-hand information to tell you about this accused woman, and I'm going to get to that in a minute. But first, let's talk about the actual details of this case and the onerous suppression orders that are around it. The woman has been charged with kidnapping, armed robbery, false imprisonment, unlawful assault, and assault by kicking. All these details revealed exclusively by the Herald Sun in Melbourne today. The 28-year-old woman who lives in Melbourne allegedly attacked a 31-year-old man in Melbourne on February the 16th. Now, Victorian police said in a statement that it's alleged a man was pulled from a car near the intersection of Gladstone and Cleveland streets at around 9:30 at night. He was then allegedly placed in another car and assaulted and robbed before being released in Braybrook. The Herald Sun reported that sources told them the man needed extensive treatment in hospital for injuries sustained in the horrific kidnapping and torture. Now, I want to tell you tonight about this woman accused of allegedly orchestrating the kidnapping and torture. But I can't tell you her name. I can't show you her photograph. I can't even tell you what her family situation is or what ethnic community she's from. I can't tell you the work she's been doing or name the organisation. And all the while, this woman is now out on bail in Melbourne. There are things highly relevant to this case that I simply can't discuss with you, all because of highly onerous suppression orders granted today by the court. And the media wasn't even given an opportunity to challenge them. My understanding is that these suppression orders will be quite rightly challenged by major media companies because justice needs to be transparent, and in this particular case, it's only right that key details are provided to the public. But even with these highly onerous suppression orders in place, there is some information I can bring you. I can tonight reveal that members of the Jewish community had repeatedly warned police and ASIO about the woman now charged with alleged kidnapping and torture. Repeatedly warned police. And this was after she published numerous social media posts about individuals in the Jewish community. Last year, I had previously reported that the woman was a terrorist sympathiser who was sharing Hamas content and propaganda online. After that report, the accused woman made several social media posts about me in December. She's got tens of thousands of followers. And one of her followers then posted this. He said, Sharri Markson, a Jew, a Zionist, spreading Islamophobia and lies to incite genocide. We need the death penalty for people like this. And he posted, get her. And he tagged the name of the accused woman. He said, just make sure you don't yell, Allahu Akbar. There were more direct threats from him saying, and I quote, you have no idea how badly you've effed up. Guess you forgot to read the room. You about to have a rough year. This then led to posts about the death march and support for Hamas. And when I wrote on Instagram that this was my final Sky News editorial for 2023, the person wrote, make it final ever. I obviously reported these threats, and one of them saying that I need the death penalty, a blatant death threat to police, along with others, like this one that said, "Should be you who is beheaded and killed." I'd say raped also, but that would just be torture to the soldiers. As a result, Sky News hired security for me and my family. Now, I haven't spoken about this publicly before because I always try to never bring myself into stories. I'm a journalist and I report on the news. I investigate what happens in the world. But in this instance, I feel that speaking out about this is in the public interest. It raises the question why police didn't take this more seriously. I know of 4 others who went to police about this same person. I also know others who raised her with the security agencies because they were concerned about her posting of Hamas propaganda. What did the police do? What did ASIO do? Well, nothing that I know of. So I'm speaking about my personal experience now because we need to know why the authorities seemingly didn't lift a finger, and now someone has been allegedly kidnapped and tortured. Why aren't police taking seriously the threats that people in the Jewish community are receiving from individuals living here in Australia? One of those in the Jewish community that this woman repeatedly posted about online is a midwife, Sharon Stollier. She's agreed for me to name her tonight. Now, she's not personally Jewish, but she's married to a Jew. Sharon went to New South Wales Police several times with the social media posts that she felt were clearly threatening. Police did nothing about it, sent her away. Now, as for the kidnapping charges, that will be a matter determined by the Victorian judicial system or by a Victorian court. They are unrelated. But while the Jewish community was being targeted, controversial author and pro-Palestinian activist Constance Hall encouraged her 380,000 followers to follow this accused woman. Constance Hall published an Instagram post saying that she was excited to see who the woman was going to take down next. Excited to see who the woman was going to take down next. Apparently, watching someone take down Jews is entertaining to Constance Hall. The Greens have also associated with her with Green Senator Mehreen Faruqi posing alongside the accused woman in Canberra recently, and so did Green Senator Janet Rice. This shows the company the now extremist Greens Party are happy to keep. And now, this very same individual who posed with the Greens, who Constance Hall encouraged her followers to follow, has been charged with orchestrating the kidnapping and torture of a man who works for a Jewish employer. All right, to have a look at some of the other big stories today. Joining me now, former Victorian Liberal Party President Michael Kroger and former Labor MP, former Labor Minister Graham Richardson. Richo, Michael, great to see you both. We would discuss that topic, but we can't for legal reasons, so we're going to have a look at some other stories today. A new article breaking...
Well, Sharri, we can discuss what's happening in this country. I mean, I am shocked to my core to hear what you've just said about what's happened to you. What is happening in this country? I mean, Jew hatred, encouraging violence, mullahs in Western Sydney getting up and calling for the death of Jews. The demonstration on the 9th saying, where's the Jews, or gas the Jews. These hate-filled demonstrations in Melbourne, which are just Jew hatred, anti-Semitic, neo-Nazis on the fringes of them with this whole wipeout of Israel. I mean, Sharri, we can talk about the gender pay, gap equality report, but that's just irrelevant compared to what's happening into this beautiful country. We don't want in this country this hatred, this vicious anti-Jewish hatred. And as you say, where are the police? Richo, I think you and I both gave Chris Minns, big points early on. But Chris, What's happening? No prosecutions except the Jewish bloke who held the flag and the Jewish person in Melbourne who got pushed over? Where are you, Chris?
It is so well said, Michael. I really appreciate that. Thank you. And, you know, when you look at the bigger picture, it is devastatingly sad what is unfolding in our country. It is devastating. I mean, we just take one day at a time. We deal with the news. We report on it. We call it out. But when you step back and look at the bigger picture, as you've just outlined, I mean, it's terrifying. And then
every day.
Well, just today, you know, Patricia Karvelis on the ABC, she had the president of the Islamic Council of Victoria on to do an interview. His name's Adel Salman. And he just refused to condemn what is clearly a terrorist massacre of 1,200 Israelis by Hamas. Not only that, he actually said it was legitimate. Let's just have a listen to that.
It is absolutely legitimate for the Palestinians to try to break the siege of Gaza.
No, I'm talking about October the 7th.
As I said, I'm not going to condemn the Palestinians for resisting. I'm not going to condemn the Palestinians for trying to break their siege on their territory.
So, sorry, I just want to be clear. October the 7th, you're saying you won't denounce that?
I denounce any violence against civilians.
Now, Richo, of course, I understand everyone's going to have a different view on this current war, the Israel's war on Hamas. I get it. But even the Islamic Council of Victoria president should be able to clearly and unequivocally call out terrorism.
Of course, but you won't do that if you're a sympathiser, and you know, I think there are just too many of them around the place. I'm staggered by it at times. I've always had a simple view about Israel. That is, I support entirely its existence, and I'm just violently against, well, not violent because I don't do anything that's violent, but I'm very strongly against this push that I see around me these days to bring anti-Semitism back into our society. I think it had been suppressed for a long time, but I look around me now and I see signs that people are trying to get it back up again. Yeah,
it's every day, it's everywhere. Let's move on to federal politics. A new piece in The Nightly, this new digital online platform run by Channel 7. Former editor-in-chief of The Australian, Christopher Dorr, writes that Albanese has put his hard left mates from university days in key positions across the government. The piece also looks at the influence of Penny Wong, as well as how Albanese has been apparently begging her not to retire. Look, Michael, it's astonishing that this deep dive into Albanese's office and team, you know, shows that he's surrounded by even what Albanese, apparently, according to this reporting, he refers to his own team as the Albanistas, named after the Nicaraguan left-wing resistance fighters. It's just astonishing when you look at it.
Daniel Ortega, I thought we'd got rid of him in the 70s, but he's back. Look, I'd be fascinated to hear Richo's view on this, but you know, as Richo knows better than anyone, the Labor Party's incredibly tribal. And he's surrounded himself by people who have been in his corner for 20 or 30 years, which is why Catherine Murphy, who comes in, and I read that she's going to tell him like it is. She's going to give him the, you know, she's not going to hold back. She's going to tell him what needs to be told to him. Well, he's going to show her the door very quickly, because there's nothing a leader dislikes more than a blow-in telling you where you're wrong all day long. I don't think she'll last long. The people that will last long, the people that have been with him on this 30-year journey, Wong, Gartrell, etc.
Yeah, well, we'll see how it goes. I mean, he seems to be, according to the article, welcoming her advice, even if it's already been what he doesn't want to hear. Richo, you're a personal mate of the Prime Minister's. Do you think that he doesn't take advice well from those he disagree with? Because that's what we've seen in this reporting over the past 3 days, that even those close to him warned him against holding the voice referendum, and he just ignored the advice.
Well, I've never known a leader who took advice from everybody that he should have taken advice from. I've met plenty of leaders who wouldn't take advice from anyone. They're a dime a dozen. And it's really hard sometimes to get people to listen. Now, I've always found, perhaps because I've got a good personal relationship with him, that he will listen. If I call him and proffer an opinion, then I see that he does listen, and at times he'll even alter his behaviour or policy if you can convince him he's been going in the wrong direction. So,
but Richo, sometimes it's the other way around, isn't it? Because you didn't agree with the voice initially, and then next minute you were on TV advocating for the voice. So Albo had changed your mind, not the other way around.
Albo didn't change my mind on that. I did the thing, I suppose, that you have to do. I went with my tribe, even though it pained me a little to do so. I've done that a few times in my life. In the end, I don't pretend that I have all the wisdom, but I've never been one to break tribal rules. I'm a Labor man all the way from the old bootstraps right up to there, and it won't change.
There you go. Obviously, it's the Dunkley by-election on the weekend. The PM says he's not going to spend Saturday night in the electorate. Instead, he's flying back to Sydney, where he may or may not go to the Mardi Gras. Here's Albo today.
At this stage, my plans for Saturday night are to have dinner with my family. I'll wait and see whether we end up going there or not, but it's to be back in Sydney because it's my birthday.
Michael, is that fair enough, or do you think the PM should be in Dunkley for this critical by-election?
Well, he should be, but things seem to be going a little bit airy for Labor down there. It should be 3 to 4%, but there's something in the water. So one of my friends who's been down there for the last few days is telling me a long-time Liberal Party campaigner standing on the booth saying to me, "I'm not sure about this, mate." He said, "I'm not sure that 3 to 4%'s right. It may be worse than that for Labor." So Albo's probably right to go home, but either way, he'll go to the Mardi Gras because he can't resist a freebie, can he? So he'll be there. He'll be there.
I'll have to give you a call later, Michael. We might have a little side bet on this, I think.
Well,
okay.
What's your sense,
right,
Michael?
Are
you thinking that Labor is still going to win Dunkley?
Yeah.
My sense is Labor are going to win, and it's 3 to 4%. However, there are a lot of negatives, 1%ers playing against Labor. The cost of living lie hasn't gone down well. Mortgage rates are still too high. Albo told everyone that fixing the cost of living crisis, as he called it, under Morrison and Frydenberg was easy. $275, not a problem. We can just do that straight away. The fact that foolish Labor candidate didn't turn up to the Paul Murray debate the other night, that was very stupid. I mean, that permeates thousands of people in the electorate. Why didn't she turn up? Oh, she's a poor candidate, or she mucked up that press conference, or she's frightened or hiding. It's just very bad not to turn up. The Australian Democrat turned up, did very well. The Libertarian person turned up, did very well, and Conroy, the Liberal candidate, I thought was outstanding. Labor not to turn up, stupid. So, Sharri, there's all these 1%ers working against Labor. It could be worse than 4%. The wind is gently blowing against Albo at the minute.
Well, all the polls, 4 polls out this week, all show that Albo's ratings are falling. One of them even that the coalition is now ahead of Labor. Richo, what's your sense about what's going to happen on Saturday?
I think, where Labor's in the midst of midterm blues. Every government has them. We seem to be having them at the moment. I'd say in a seat like Dunkley, it's not easy for us to win. I'm very reluctant to predict Dunkley. I think it's going to be very tight. But if I had to put money on it, I'd say Labor will still scrape in, but it won't be a triumphant result.
Yeah, well, it seems like the Prime Minister's gearing everyone up for a poor result. I mean, he keeps speaking about this 7% swing that he says is the average result against the government in a by-election. Of course, Dennis Shanahan yesterday revealed that really it's more like 2.9%, especially when the sitting MP has passed away. So Albanese trying to soften up people for a bad result, but we'll see just how bad it is. Now, just before we go, there's this kind of funny story, but it's actually quite alarming in the Australian today that the woke brigade has further infiltrated the Defence Force. Special Forces war dog handlers will now be retrained to be more culturally sensitive when confronting enemy fighters. They say it's because in some Islamic cultures, animals are considered unclean or impure. Michael, I mean, it seems to be beyond ridiculous. When you're at war, the dogs, which I understand they're used to try and sniff out landmines and bombs, really, do they have to be worried about culturally sensitive training?
I'm sure I speak on behalf of my old mate Richo when I say this, Sharri. We are too old to talk about stories which cannot possibly be true. That cannot be true. The Defence Forces surely haven't put out such a memo. That is preposterous, ridiculous, laughable. I mean,
and yet
sensitivity training. No, that's not true. That can't be true. That makes our Defence Forces a complete standing joke.
Yeah.
That can't be true.
Well, it's true. They're
Can't be
quoted.
true.
You've read it in the Oz Today.
Oh, I did. It's got to be a typo.
Well,
It's got to be a typo. I know it's not, but seriously.
Richo?
Has to be written by Vince Sorrenti. There's no doubt about it. It's his sort of style. I can see Vince all over it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I know Vince Sorrenti was there entertaining everyone at Anthony Pratt's place on the weekend with Katy Perry performing. So there you go. Graham Richardson, Michael Kroger, great to see you both.
Thanks, Sharri.
Now, coming up, the New South Wales Police Commissioner tries to justify her clumsy and callous comments, saying that the families of Luke Davies and Jessie Baird should be grateful to the accused murderer. It's just stumble after stumble. Plus, the revelation that right after allegedly murdering the pair, Bola Mayor Condon went and lodged a bullying complaint against a colleague. Crime reporter Mark Murray is going to join me to speak about this next. Welcome back. Well, New South Wales Police Commissioner Karen Webb is under intense scrutiny over her handling of recent investigations, including the alleged murder of Sydney couple Jessie Baird and Luke Davies. Last night on this show, we called out her callous comments when speaking about the discovery of two bodies. Here they are again.
I'd like to say also that this information did come with the assistance of the accused, for which we're very grateful, and I'm sure the families are very grateful.
Callous comments. No one is grateful to an alleged murderer. Well, she was under fire over those comments today, and here she was trying to defend them.
Well, certainly I'm not perfect and I could always do things better, but the comment around grateful for the information, I'm not necessarily grateful to the accused, but let me just put it this way. Without that information, we were still searching, and really yesterday was the watershed moment when we were actually able to tell the family that we had found Jessie and Luke, and I think that's an important distinction to make about without that cooperation, we'd be still searching.
Well, one of Jessie Baird's friends has described those comments as inappropriate, and he said that the accused killer deserves no form of thanks at all. Well, the Daily Telegraph's crime editor, Mark Murray, joins me now. Mark, Karen Webb's handling of this, yet again, poor handling of another major case, has been described as a train wreck. What do you think about her performance this week?
Well, it obviously leaves a lot to be desired. Now, you know, she hasn't been seen for a long time. She's not very good with the media, and I think she even admits that. But she's come out and, as she said, she's just made gaffe after gaffe, and it hasn't instilled a lot of confidence. And the more she's trying to repair it, she's just going to have to get a lot better, or else the knives are going to come out.
I'm surprised they're not already. I mean, well, I think they are, judging by this scoop in the Daily Telegraph, your paper today, that she skipped the 2023 National Police Remembrance Day because she was relaxing on holidays. She was also not there for the October 9 Opera House protests. And, you know, this does show that the knives are out for her, doesn't it?
It does, but we've seen this before. I think you've been around long enough and you do remember what was going on around the time that Andrew Scipione was commissioner. It's very hard to get rid of a commissioner, although we've seen that it can happen. We've seen that happen in Queensland just recently. There is disquiet, but she has some strong supporters and she's going to need them. actually what's happening right as we speak is that all the senior police will be in Goulburn tomorrow night at a dinner before the passing out parade on Friday. And she's going to have to go around and really assure them that she's going to do better. They're asking for it. As I said, the senior guys and senior women around her are not openly talking, like getting rid of her, but there are a lot of those in those lower ranks that are really, really disappointed in her performance. And I think the government's going to be watching her very closely. She's skating on thin ice.
Skating on thin ice, the New South Wales Police Commissioner. Now, you revealed today that the accused killer cop, Beau Lamar Condon, actually lodged a bullying claim in the days after he'd allegedly murdered this Sydney couple. What happened? This is just so weird. And then also, we've discovered that he apparently had surgery as well. Was he just trying to return to normal life here?
I don't know. Look, he made that call while he was on his way in that morning to hand himself into Bondi Police Station. Now, what was going through his head, why he was doing that, we just don't know. Now, this whole case, as I said, the details that have come out involving a accused murderer after he's charged are astounding, and even coming out from the police. I've never really seen it before. The amount of interest, macabrely, in this, because it involves a police officer and using his weapon. Now, there are more questions about that being asked. So the story is one that is really about domestic violence, but it's just become such a wide net that's been thrown over the whole police operation, the police investigation, and particularly Karen Webb's response to the way it was and how long it took her to come out. As I said, it's one that's really put her leadership to the test, and she's going to have to really improve in the next few weeks, and hopefully there's nothing major that goes wrong, or else she's in a bit of trouble.
Yeah. Look, and also, you know, questions over why he was in the police force in the first place when there were major red flags. I mean, stalking of celebrities in the way that he was doing that previously for his celebrity blog post, I mean, that should have raised issues.
Well, they've immediately pulled his psychological evaluation, which allowed him to get out of, graduate from the academy. That's already been pulled, and they're looking at that. You know, there are things that we call red flags. I know that they are trying to get more inclusive type people in the police force, including from different walks of life, people with different interests. I know one guy's obsessed with snakes, and he's working in that department. So I think, but this guy, obviously, they're going to have to look very deeply into his whole career. The tasering incident, that was just extraordinary, and how he got that was, and he walked. And
just to remind viewers who may not have read that he was investigated for tasering someone in the face, was cleared and was allowed to continue on in his police career. Mark Murray, thank you so much for joining me. Mark Murray is the most experienced police reporter around, and we're grateful to have him join us. Now, I want to return to this gender pay gap report that came out yesterday. It has stunned me that since the release of this report, we've seen claims that this reporting will turn men into Andrew Tate supporters, that this is just a left-wing ideological issue. This is utter garbage. Equal pay is not ideology. This is simply saying that women are equal to men, that women are capable of doing the same jobs as men in corporate Australia, and that women should be paid the same. And if you don't agree with that, it's not an ideological issue, it's not left or right. You belong in the 1950s and deserve to be shamed as sexist. For all of the husbands, fathers and grandfathers watching, of course you want your daughters and wives to be paid the same as men. It's a no-brainer. Yet we're seeing dozens of companies in corporate Australia tick a box by holding an expensive International Women's Day event, they're virtue signalling, but then they fail to promote women to senior positions, or they don't pay them properly. I mean, the data from this report this week isn't perfect. It doesn't compare men and women in the same jobs, but it does compare how much a company pays women compared to men. And it's better having this information than not having it. No company is going to want to be on this list next year. They're going to work hard to make sure they're not named and shamed, and this means, hopefully, a whole lot of women will be promoted or will be paid more, and that just means equally than they are at the moment. It will bring about quick change. Now, people say, oh, women have children, they can't work anymore, that's why they're paid less than men. Well, this is rubbish. I don't know a woman who no longer aspires to have an interesting career just because they've had a child. Having children doesn't mean necessarily that you lose your ambition. But what it does mean is that there are scores of extremely smart mothers who find it hard, if not impossible, to get back into the workforce after having children because companies aren't flexible. Companies are demanding 9 to 5 or more hours instead of allowing mothers to do the work when it suits them, when the kids are at school and then later at night when their children are asleep. There needs to be major reform from companies. Well, to discuss this, joining me is Ruby Leigh Gatfield. She's Head of Research and Insights at Future Women, and she's a former Senior Advisor at the Workplace Gender Equality Agency, which actually published this data. Ruby, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Now, what's your response to the critics who say that the report this week is useless because it doesn't compare women and men in the same jobs?
Look, I think I'd say they're actually missing the point entirely with that distinction, because that distinction is actually very intentional. When we think about comparing the pay of women and men in the same roles, of course that's really important, but at the same time, it's been unlawful to pay women and men unequally for 55 years now. And so what we're actually seeing is that while, it is still too pervasive and happening too often, it's actually a pretty small piece of the puzzle. And what the gender pay gap does, the average difference in earnings between women and men across an entire organisation or workforce, what that does is tell us a much bigger story about the roles that women and men are playing in our society and in our economy more broadly. And so I think what successful competitive CEOs and employers know right now is that to really narrow their gender pay gap, they need to do much more than just stamp out those or eradicate those instances of unequal pay, because it's a much bigger story.
So, excluding the careers where clearly there is a physical barrier to women doing the same jobs, industries like mining and others, are we seeing across the board that women are in more junior positions and men are still being promoted, but women aren't?
Absolutely. Yes, and that's what the data tells us, right? I think that there are hundreds of women, thousands of women across the country yesterday who saw that data, and many of whom who reached out to me and told me that, their industry or their employer had told them they were a leader in this space and that they had 50-50 workforce representation between women and men, but yet they still see this pay gap. So, they're smart enough to know that what that means is that we've got far more women in these junior ranks and they're not rising to the senior ranks in the same way, and that's for a whole range of reasons.
Look, this reporting also shows base pay and bonuses, which is quite fascinating. What does it tell us?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think if we look just at base pay, the data told us that the pay gap is sitting nationally at about 14%, 14.5%. But when they include overtime payments, discretionary payments like bonuses and other things like superannuation, we start to see that pay gap widen. So it sits at about 19%. And so what that tells us is that there's this whole range of bias and discrimination that comes into our decision making when we think about overtime work, who we give our bonuses to, when we're reviewing performance, reviewing pay, thinking about who we give those important jobs and projects and opportunities to rise to. We're giving them too often to men. And we saw that total remuneration gap, more than base salary, was much more common, as you say, in those male-dominated industries like mining, where you've got that kind of site work or roles that are much harder for women to access because of that lack of flexibility.
And in those cases, it's of course understandable. Look, this report also really highlighted that in a whole raft of retailers that claim to be supporting women, inspiring women, servicing women, and we're often talking companies like Lorna Jane, City Chic, Sea Folly. My colleague and friend Jenna Clark actually wrote about this today in the Australian newspaper. These companies literally made for women, and yet they had quite eye-watering pay disparities. You're looking at them now on the screen, massive pay disparities. Does that surprise you, the hypocrisy of companies like this?
Look, sadly it doesn't. I think those in the sector have seen for years now, for decades, that we know that in every single industry category, every occupational category across the country, there is a gender pay gap. It doesn't really matter how you cut the cloth, hourly pay, annual pay. We're seeing pay gaps, and even in those female-dominated industries, we see it in healthcare, we see it in teaching and childcare, and so it doesn't surprise me to see it in those big retailers. But I think, again, what it tells us, and to those critics who kind of say the pay gap is a reflection of women's choice to work in, their choice to work in, nursing or choice to work part-time, what we're seeing is that's not necessarily the case. There's a whole range of structural barriers, our parental leave policies, our childcare policies, our access to part-time and flexible working. All of these factors actually limit the choices we can make in the workforce as women. And employers play a really important role in creating that change, right? I think there's a lot we can learn from some of the employers that came out yesterday with neutral pay gaps, who've done the hard yards and have narrowed their gap in a really meaningful way.
All right, Ruby Leigh-Gatfield, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, still to come, Joe Biden and Donald Trump head to the US southern border on the same day. I'm going to have more on that in a minute. Plus, Albanese's tax cut timing under the microscope ahead of the Dunkley by-election. My political panel will be on live next. Welcome back. Well, there's controversy over an advertisement that's being aired in Sri Lanka. The commercials were made to deter Sri Lankan asylum seekers from arriving illegally on boats to Australia. This is part of Australia's Zero Chance campaign. Have a look at one of the ads.
මං ඔස්ට්‍රේලියාවට බෝට්ටුවෙන් යන්න තීරණය කරේ ජීවිතෙන් ගොඩ එන්න. ඒ තුනේ ජීවිතේ නැති වෙච්ච එක. මාව අහුණා. ආයෙ හැරවලා ලංකාවට එව්වා.
Joining me now, National Senate Leader Bridget McKenzie and Labor MP Daniel Molino. Now, Bridget, these adverts have been slammed as unethical because they reference suicide and self-harm, so trying to make the case that anyone who arrives by boat to Australia will be in a really difficult, situation. Do you think these ads that are this brutal and explicit are now necessary because people smugglers have been spreading the message that Labor is now soft on borders?
Well, I think that's the only conclusion you can draw, Sharri. The reality is the last time Labor was in power, we saw thousands, dying at sea. We saw boat arrivals week on week, and we're seeing that again. The fact is those who want to come to Australia illegally see Labor as a soft touch, and unfortunately that view is being supported by Labor's incompetence here at home with the way they're dealing with detainees and the like. So the reality is it's tough to obviously get on a boat and come here to Australia, and it's very dangerous and it shouldn't be recommended. So I think you need both the push and the pull factors being dealt with, and it's an appropriate ad, but the reality is it has to be made because people smugglers are seeing the opportunity now that Labor is in power.
What do you think about that, Daniel? Do you agree with Bridget there that it is an extreme ad, but it's an admission from the government that they don't have a handle on the boats?
Well, hi, Sharri and Bridget. No, I don't agree. And I think what's happening is that the opposition are really twisting and turning, and every day, every week, we find them trying to twist their arguments into a new direction to say that this or that aspect of policy is too weak and now some parts of it apparently are too strong, when really what we're seeing is that Operation Sovereign Borders is continuing as it had under the previous government. And the irony of Bridget calling out this particular campaign is that Zero Chance was actually started under the previous government, that it's a long-running advertisement that is designed by market experts and that isn't approved in individual cases by the Minister's office. So this is something that is designed by experts, it's designed so as to be a disincentive, and it's really just yet another component of Operation Sovereign Borders that is a continuation from the previous term.
Bridget, do you want to have a quick response there?
Well, I think the facts speak for themselves, and unfortunately Daniel's in denial, like the rest of his government, around their atrocious track record. It was all exposed in Senate estimates. They have been unable to keep control of the borders. They have been unable to make decisions around the detainees. They don't even know where they actually are at the moment. That is the fact, as much as Daniel would like the talking points to say otherwise. And every single day there is another decision being made by Andrew Giles, which puts Australians in harm's way. So they've got to get it under control. Australians do not have any truck with governments who cannot keep them safe and keep control of our borders.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to another topic.
Well, I would just say on that,
Go ahead, Daniel.
I was just going to very briefly, just one sentence on that point about detainees. I mean, in Senate estimates, it came out that the national security experts confirmed that the measures that are in place that were voted on by both parties are in fact working and that they are providing sufficient oversight.
Well, I would beg to differ on that. They can't be working if there have been 27 re-offences. That can't be a successful outcome from the criminals who've been released from immigration detention. Let's have a look at this other topic, though. If you were watching this show on Thursday night, you might remember that I obtained the list of 80 Palestinians who were given visas to come to Australia by Labor government. I revealed that one of them had liked posts on social media that celebrated the Hamas terror attacks, and these were on October 7, on October 8. Well, today in Senate estimates, today in the Senate, Senator James Paterson, he's the Shadow Minister for Home Affairs, he asked Agricultural Minister Murray Watt how it could be that someone who'd expressed support for Hamas was given a visa. Let's have a look at how that went down.
On the 22nd of February, Sky News reported that one of the individuals granted a visa and already living in Australia expressed support for the horrific terrorist attack perpetrated by Hamas on October 7. How was it that this person was granted a visa if sufficient checks were supposedly conducted, as you have just said?
Thank you, Senator Paterson. Minister Watt.
Well, President, it would almost be as if there's a close relationship between the opposition and Sky News, based on the questions that we've had here today. I mean, we know that all of you beat the door down in order to beat each other into the Sky News studio 10 times a day. And it would hello all of my friends in Sky News. You're obviously now drafting questions for the opposition. A bit of a promotional campaign for Sky News from Senator Paterson and his colleagues.
And James Paterson tried to ask the question again, could they guarantee that no one else would come to Australia, who's supported the Hamas terror attacks? I mean, Daniel, I know this isn't your area, you're an MP, but this isn't properly answering the question at all. Do you understand why people would be concerned about this?
Well, Sharri, firstly, can I just say that obviously I've gone out of my way to be on Sky tonight, so it's not just members of the opposition. But look, I think on this important issue, what I would say is that if you go to the rest of Senator Watt's answer, what you'll find is that he pointed out that, again, looking at the continuity of a lot of these policies, there were in fact thousands of individuals allowed to come into the country from conflict zones, whether you look at Syria or Afghanistan under the previous government. And so, look, there's a process in place that has continued on under this government. So, yes, there have been a number of people that have been allowed to come into the country from that particular area, but you look at the previous government, the processes in place were very similar. In fact, there's additional funding in place under the current government.
We're out of time, so let's quickly get Bridget's response to that. Labor says the same security checks are being done that happened under the coalition.
Well, Sharri, I was sitting next to Pato when they asked those questions, and it was absolutely unconscionable that this government and their ministers choose to make snide political jokes when being asked serious questions about how they can guarantee that they're not actually letting in terrorist sympathisers. That's a legitimate question to be asked. The minister failed to do it, and what's worse, made a crude joke about it. It just, I think, shows that they don't take this policy area seriously. It shows in their level of incompetence, and it shows in the minister's answer tonight.
All right. And Daniel, by the way, we do appreciate you coming on Sky News as a Labor MP because a lot of your colleagues don't. So we hope you'll keep coming back. Daniel Molino, Bridget McKenzie, thank you both for your time. Now, after the break, Adam Crichton will join us live from Washington to break down the Michigan primary results, and we'll talk about how Joe Biden and Donald Trump are set to head to the US southern border on the same day. All of that in a moment. Well, it was a big day in the US as voters turned out in Michigan for the 2024 Republican and Democratic primary elections. Let's break this down with the Australian's Washington correspondent, Adam Crichton. Adam, great to see you as always. Look, Donald Trump came out on top, as expected, of course, against his main rival, Nikki Haley. Joe Biden also did well, but not as high as some expected he should have done.
Yes. Yeah, certainly for Donald Trump, it was a great night. He got 68% of the vote and Haley got 27%, which was one of her worst results so far. And it's also worth bearing in mind that Donald Trump only visited Michigan 3 times in more than 12 months, so he barely campaigned there at all. And Nikki Haley massively outspent him on advertising. Now, for the president, you're right. It wasn't a great result. He got about 80% of the vote, but for an incumbent president, that's not fantastic. He should get 97% like he did last week in South Carolina. So some dissatisfaction there among voters, and it probably comes down to the large Arabic population in Michigan, some 350,000. They typically vote Democrat. And of course, they're quite angry with the US government's policy in Israel. And so there was a groundswell of support there to vote uncommitted. And the uncommitted box got about 100,000 votes, which is probably ringing some alarm bells in the White House.
No, I saw your piece that you wrote for The Australian about this, and I thought that was really interesting that, you know, the perception that I wouldn't agree with, that Biden's been too pro-Israel, was an issue for him in Michigan, and that was probably why he's ramped up his rhetoric about demanding a ceasefire.
Yeah, look, I mean, I can't obviously, you know, draw a direct link, but it's certainly possible. I mean, it's, you know, it's a coincidence to me, seemingly, that this has just occurred in the past 2 weeks, just before the primary. And this is something that they're worried about because this state is very important. It's got 10 million people in it. Trump won it by 10,000 votes in 2016, and Biden won it by 150,000 votes in 2020. And so small numbers can make a big difference. And so I thought, especially in relation to the sudden announcement about the legality of settlers on the West Bank, that just seemed to come out of nowhere. And it was just made in the last few days. And so I tend to think probably that it had something to do with the primary, don't you?
No, it does make sense. Look, Greg Sheridan was on Sky News earlier, the Australian's foreign editor, and he spoke about how there might still be a change from Joe Biden, but it could happen later in the year at the Democratic Convention. What's your view on this?
Yeah, certainly there could be. I mean, until 1968, these conventions are actually where the presidential candidate was indeed chosen. It's only fairly recently that that it all gets kind of wrapped up in advance because of the various rules in different states. So it is possible that it kind of goes back to the old way. I mean, it's not going great for President Biden. I predicted a year ago that he wouldn't be the candidate. I still think he probably won't be. It's going to depend on the polling, but his polling is absolutely appalling. And at this stage, he can't win the election against Donald Trump at these poll levels. So the question is, though, who do they replace him with? And the Democrat bench is pretty thin, I think. I mean, there's Gavin Newsom in California, but there are many questions about how he's going to translate to the national scene. So they have a thin bench. And
I guess
ultimately, if you have a determined president who wants to run again,
anyone would be better than Joe Biden when he can't finish a sentence. And I'm not going to let you finish yours. Adam Crichton, thanks so much for joining us tonight. We're out of time. I'll see you tomorrow at 8. And here's Paul Murray.